Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamadaya Asta Prasha Vadeshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevya Bhagavadita Mashloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistaki. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 30, description of adverse fruit of activities, not the most pleasant topic, as we'll soon discover. And we're going to read 19 through the end of the chapter, 34. Take turns with these verses. At death, he sees the messengers of the Lord of death come before him, their eyes full of wrath, and in great fear he passes stool and urine.
The criminal arrested for punishment by the constables of the state, a person engaged in criminal sense gratification, similarly arrested by the Yamadutas, who bind him by the neck with strong rope and cover his subtle body so that he may undergo severe punishment.
By the constables of Yamaraj, he is overwhelmed and trembles in their hands. While passing on the road, he's bitten by dogs, and he can remember the sinful activities of his life. He is thus terribly distressed.
Under the scorching sun, the criminal has to pass through roads of hot sand with forest fires on both sides. He is whipped on the back by the constables, and because of his inability to walk, he is afflicted by hunger and thirst. But unfortunately, there's no drinking water, no shelter, no place for rest on the road.
While passing on that road to the abode of Yamaraj, he falls down in fatigue, and sometimes he becomes unconscious, but he's forced to rise again. In this way, he's very quickly brought to the presence of Yamaraj.
Thus he has to pass 99,000 yojanas within 2 or 3 moments, and then he is at once engaged in the torturous punishment which he is destined to suffer.
He is placed in the midst of burning pieces of wood, and his limbs are set on fire. In some case, he is made to eat his own flesh or have it eaten by others.
His entrails are pulled out by the hounds and vultures of hell. Even though he is still alive to see it, and he is subjected to torment by serpents, scorpions, gnats, and other creatures that bite him.
Next, his limbs are lopped off and torn asunder by elephants. He is hurled down from hilltops. He is also held captive either in water or in a cave.
Men and women whose lives were built upon indulgence in illicit sex life are put into many kinds of miserable conditions in the hells known as Tamisara, Ananda Tamisara, and Ravana Rava.
Lord Kapila continued, "My dear mother, it is sometimes said that we experience hell or heaven on this planet, for hellish punishments are sometimes visible on this planet also.
After leaving this body, the man who maintained himself and his family members by sinful activities suffers a hellish life, and his relatives suffer also. He goes alone to the darkest regions of hell after quitting the present body, and the money he had acquired by envying other living entities is the passage money with which he leaves this world.
Thus, by the arrangement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the maintainer of kinsmen is put into a hellish condition to suffer for his sinful activities, like a man who has lost his wealth.
Therefore, a person who is very eager to maintain his family and kinsmen simply by black methods suddenly goes to the darkest region of hell, which is known as Anda Tamishra.
Having gone through all the miserable hellish conditions, and having passed in a regular order through the lowest form of animal life prior to human birth, having thus been purged of his sins, one is reborn again as a human being on this earth.
So this is the verse we'll stop on, 34. We'll read the report. Atastam naralokasya Atastam naralokasya Yavate yatanandaya Yavate yatandaya Kamasha samanukamya Kamasha samanukamya Punaratra vracheshchuchi Punaratra vracheshchuchi Adastana lakasya Avate yatanadaya Vasha samanukamya Punaratra vracheshchuchi Adastana lakasya Yavate yatanadaya Tamasha samanukamya Punatra vacheshtuchi Adastana lakasya Yavate yatanadaya Tamasha samanukamya Punaratra vacheshtuchi Adastana lakasya
Adaya
Yavate yatanadaya
Ramasha Saman Ramya
Kamasha samanukamya
Punar Atra Rajek Chuchi
Punarata vacheshtuchi Adastanara lokasya yavatir yatanandaya Ramasha samanukramya Guna achavachestiti. Do the word for word together. Adastat from below. Anaralokasya, human birth. Yavatihi, as many. Yatana, punishments. Adaya, and so on. Kramasha, in irregular order. Samanukramya, having gone through. Punaha, again. Atra, here on this earth. Avajat, they return. Suchihi, for having gone through all the miserable hellish conditions and having passed in irregular order through the lowest forms of animal life prior to human birth, and having thus been purged of his sins, one is reborn again as a human being on this earth. Purport. Just as a prisoner who has undergone troublesome prison life is set free again, the person who is always engaged in impious and mischievous activities is put into hellish conditions. And when he has undergone different hellish lives, namely those of lower animals like cats, dogs, and hogs, by the gradual process of evolution, he again comes back as a human being. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that even though a person engaged in the practice of the yoga system may not finish perfectly and may fall down for some reason or other, his next life as a human being is guaranteed. It is stated that such a person who has fallen from the path of yoga practice is given a chance in his next life to take birth in a very rich family or in a very pious family. It is interpreted that, quote, rich family, end quote, refers to a big mercantile family because generally people who engage in trades and mercantile business are very rich. One who engaged in the process of self-realization or connecting with the supreme absolute truth, but fell short, is allowed to take birth in such a rich family, or he is allowed to take birth in the family of pious brahmanas. Either way, he is guaranteed to appear in human society in his next life. It can be concluded that if someone is not willing to enter into hellish life, as in Tamisra or Anda Tamisra, then he must take to the process of Krishna consciousness, which is the first class system, because even if one is unable to attain complete Krishna consciousness in this life, he is guaranteed at least to take his next life, his next birth, in a human family. He cannot be sent into a hellish condition. Krishna consciousness is the purest life, and it protects all beings from gliding down to the hell to take birth in a family of dogs or hogs. Thus in the Bhaktivinoda purports of the third canto, 30th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Description by Lord Kapila of Adverse Fruitive Activities. Om Ganti Mandasara. So this is a little bit of a gruesome section. I was appreciating how even when we're describing things that are somewhat unpalatable, the Sanskrit's still very beautiful. Sanskrit's such a beautiful language. It still sounds very nice and flowing, even though the meaning is not so favorable. But this idea of suffering in hell, I was raised in a Mormon family. In fact, one of my forefathers was the founder of the Mormon church. So we had a very strong sense of heaven and hell. And I don't know if you've heard this term now, I don't know if it's so common, but when I was younger, they had this term hellfire and brimstone. And basically the idea is if you don't surrender unto Jesus, then you're going to suffer eternally, hellfire and brimstone. It's a very difficult situation, not unlike what's being described here. There's some key differences in that philosophy. That's forever. You have one shot. You have surrender to Jesus in this life, or else eternally you're going to suffer in this bad place. And this is different. This is a purificatory process. Suffering is never required. Suffering is basically a teacher. It's karma. It's a law of karma. These verses, interestingly enough, nowhere it's talked about God or religion. These aren't religious verses, the section we just read. This is just a scientific principle. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's karma. And it's not eternal. Once you're purged of that reaction, once you're purged of that offense, then you're free to go back about your way. So it's not eternal, and it's not even particularly religious. We see this even in the mundane material world. We see this. If you have a bank teller goes to work and they're exchanging, so many people come in and cash checks, and so many hundreds of thousands of dollars are going through their hand. If they take some of that money and they put it in their pocket, then now they're going to be punished. Or another example is if you have some people take electricity and create a Bitcoin farm where they process computers to make money. If you take electricity from the power company and you don't pay the bill, what happens? They turn off the power. And if you've used a lot of electricity and don't pay it, they might take you to court and ask for some of the money back. So in the same way, we read these verses, that seems very harsh punishment that's being described here. But what we don't understand, or what sometimes we forget, that we think we're free to do whatever we want. To a certain extent we are. We have some freedom. We have a minute freedom to a little degree. But when we stop and analyze that freedom and what we're doing with it, what does freedom mean? It means I can come and go, I can think how I want to think, I can believe what I want to believe, I can do what I want to do. But the intelligence to think, the ability to do things, the strength, the body to have to do it, all these things aren't ours. They were given to us. In fact, our very existence was given to us. We didn't will ourselves into existence. Someone else gave us existence. The Supreme Lord, of course, we understand this is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But we were given existence by someone else, and then we're given a body, we're given senses, we're given eyes, ears, nose, sense of touch, so many things, so many facilities. And so whatever we do with these things doesn't really belong to us. It's just like if you're a carpenter and somebody wants a house built, and they come to the carpenter and they say, here's the wood, can you build me a house? You're going to pay him for his time, but you have to provide the wood. Or if you don't have the wood, you pay him extra and he'll provide the wood. But the carpenter doesn't then own the house. Well, I built this house, it's mine. No, it wasn't his wood and he didn't pay for it all. So in the same way, the things that we do, the activities that we do with our strength and our intelligence and our energy, we can't take credit for them and say they're mine, because the strength and intelligence and energy that we use to do it doesn't belong to us. And so this is the principle that's being described here. When we don't understand that, we are entitled, just to back up a little bit, by nature of our existence, we're entitled to those things that we need to exist. And there's scriptures that state this, that we can accept those things that we need. We need a certain amount of oxygen to breathe. We're not going to get taxed for breathing that. In one sense, we are. In one sense, we do have an obligation to the sun and the water and the river for all those things. But when we start to take more than we need, now we're violating. We're taking away something from someone else, or we're taking more than our rightful thing. So if we just go through life and only accept those things we need to survive, there's very little, if any, karmic reaction, because we have to breathe, we have to walk, we have to do those things. On a more subtle level, we still have an obligation, just like the electric company. If I plug in my computer to the wall, I'm going to have to pay somebody for the electricity. So our very existence requires oxygen, requires sunlight, requires water. So we have to pay for those things. And how we pay for them is by engaging in devotional service, by appreciating, even just saying a simple prayer, thank you very much, Lord, for providing these things. That will, that's the so-called payment. So these verses are talking about a materialist or an atheist who doesn't accept there's a God. I'm going to just do what I want. And in some cases, illegally. See, some people will accumulate more money than we need. And some people will accumulate money to the point now there's all kinds of different activities that people are mistreated. They've got factories, and there's so many documentaries you can see about a company that has gone to some country and pay somebody a quarter a day or a penny a day or whatever they pay them, very hellish living conditions, so they can make cheap t-shirts or cheap computer chips or whatever. And so then there's people being oppressed so that somebody can make money. Instead of giving them a nice situation, they give them as little as possible. So then you start to get over the balance that's being discussed here, where you're doing things that are unreasonable so you can attain a profit. Then now you're violating this karmic principle, and you're opening yourself up for punishment that's being described in these verses. So I tend to think of it as karma or Krishna. Karma is a law. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with God. It's just for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Physicists understand this. Materialists understand this. If there's energy put in one direction, there's going to be some other energy in another direction. So this is karma. And we sometimes see people get away with horrendous things and don't seem to be punished. But we can understand that there is a witness and things are noted and some punishment will come in. And it's interesting that this isn't, when I first started reading Prabhupada's books, I tended to think of karma as a spiritual topic or a religious principle. But you can see it's not. It's just this scientific law. And even materialists who have no spiritual inclination or background, they understand this. If you go on YouTube, you can see videos about instant karma. Have you ever heard that term, instant karma? Some guy's driving his motorcycle and cuts someone off, and then he gets in an accident and people laugh, ha ha, instant karma. So that understanding is there, the basic understanding. You do something that's out of bounds, there's going to be a reaction for it. So that's what's being discussed here. To avoid these, of course, it's not permanent, it's not eternal. Again, suffering is not necessary in spiritual life. There are traditions within Christianity and probably other traditions that because Jesus Christ suffered on the cross, they feel they have to suffer to become purified. So they beat themselves with different devices and put themselves very austere conditions. We have that in the Vedas. There's yogis who sit around fires when it's hot in summer and go in freezing water in the winter. Do different types of austerities to impose a suffering on the body. And it's not always a bad thing. There's a great saints in our own tradition, they'll say, no, this mind needs to be trained. It's always asking for pleasure, so I have to train it not to seek after pleasure. So it's not necessarily a bad thing per se, but it's not required. You don't have to suffer to make spiritual advancement. Suffering is, generally speaking, a teacher. It lets us know. You put your hand over the fire, you get burnt. Okay, don't do that. That's not an activity you should do. And so it helps guide our thinking, and it can be useful. I know for myself, I was drawn to Krishna consciousness because of suffering. I was miserable. I tried so many activities, I tried so many substances, I tried so many different lifestyles, and I wasn't happy. There was just emptiness. And so, well, there has to be something better. There has to be a God. And so then when I met devotees, started reading the books, oh, my suffering goes well now. Oh yes, this makes sense. I can be happy. So I was drawn or motivated largely by a sense of suffering. So it can be a useful teacher to help move us in a certain direction. In fact, if you really go deep into the Vedas, the whole material creation, the whole universe, all the universes, they're only created for the sole purpose of bringing us back to the spiritual world. They have no other purpose. God doesn't need them. He doesn't want them. They exist so that conditioned souls like us can go and play and have a playground and do things, but they're designed, they're built in with a mechanism that kicks us, that creates suffering. Who in this room looks and tries to suffer? Okay? But who in this room has never suffered? Right? It comes. We don't want it. We don't try for it. We try to avoid it at all costs. But we're forced to endure it. And that's the nature of the universe. The material energies are designed. They give us the illusion, yes, you'll find some pleasure. But ultimately, you're going to suffer. Why? So we can remember, I don't belong here. It's not my home, not where I should be. Why am I suffering? Why am I here? When you start to ask those questions, then Krishna arranges. Oh, you want to know? Okay, let me help you. Let me give you some knowledge. And then we see, oh, okay, I'm not supposed to be here. This isn't my home. This isn't my body. This is not who I am. And then when we start to act on that knowledge, our suffering dissolves. And then we realize, oh, okay, I can be happy. Everything is quite nice if I don't buy into the illusion of this material world. So this punishment that we're describing here, very harsh, severe punishment, is for those living entities who sort of refuse to take the knowledge. You know, there's different ways you can learn things. You can read about something and understand I shouldn't do it. You can see someone else do it and get punished and not do it. Or you can do it yourself and get punished and then learn I don't to do it. So this is for those people who don't want to hear it, don't want to read about it. They had to actually experience it, and then they realize, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have done these things. And so we can avoid this by accepting what we need from our honest efforts, whatever comes. And if I need more than that, I don't need more than that. Whatever I need will come. And Prabhupada repeats this over and over and over. The birds are fed, elephants eat, 50 pounds. They eat a tremendous amount. There's food out there for them. They're not out there planting things, so they'll have food to eat. So whatever we need, it'll come to us. Our karma, it's there, it's provided. God brought us into existence. He'll provide what we need to exist. But because of our greed and our material propensity, we think, I need more than what's being provided. So I have to do this and I have to do that. And then we start to incur this debt that's being talked about in here, especially if I engage in illegal activities to fulfill that desire, then I'm opening myself up for this punishment as described in these verses. But for devotees or anyone who understands that there's a supreme being and surrenders to him, these punishments aren't there. It's again, I think of it as karma or Krishna, right? If we're an atheist or don't have any belief in a supreme being, karma is there to teach us. You can do this, no, you can't do that, whether in this lifetime or another lifetime. But once we take the spiritual process and surrender, we may still need to be taught lessons. We may still transgress some law. We may still, even though we surrender to Krishna, we surrender to a spiritual path. Maybe we don't understand everything and we misbehave, but it's a much different situation because we're trying, this is discussed in Bhagavad Gita, because we're trying to purify ourselves. It's like the example given, if you go out in the yard and you work and you get very muddy and then you go to take a shower, if you're in the shower and there's muddy water everywhere, nobody can criticize, say, look how dirty this water is. So you're making a big mess. It's like, well, you're in the process of cleansing yourself. So it's not considered, it's like, what, are you going to criticize someone because they're taking a shower trying to wash the dirt off of them? No, maybe if they refuse to take a shower and stay covered in mud and go out to a black tie dinner, you might say, hey, maybe you should have cleaned up. But you don't criticize someone when they're in the process of purifying their activities, even though you may see some impurities in them. The point is they're trying to remove them. So when one is engaged in spiritual life, any transgressions or mistakes or misdirections aren't to be taken very seriously because they'll rectify themselves. And so Krishna will make little adjustments and we'll learn, oh yes, that's not a good thing, let me not do that. But they're very minor. It's not these types of punishments. because it's very powerful. As soon as we take the approach of, okay, I'm a conditioned soul, let me get out of my conditioned situation, let me render some service to the Supreme Lord, that's very powerful. And we don't, at least I don't always appreciate or fully understand how powerful that is. But when we read the scriptures, we see how powerful that is. That this, there's a nice quote in the Ramayana, it's quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita, when Lord Rama, I don't know if I'll get it exactly right, but he says, Lord Ramachandra says something to the effect that if somebody one time just calls out to me and calls my name and asks for protection, it's my solemn vow that they will never have fear again. I will protect them. Something to that effect. But basically, all it takes is one time. Oh Lord, please help me. That his vow becomes to give that person protection and shelter. So it doesn't take a tremendous effort for us to get free from this type of suffering or free from our entanglement. It just takes some sincere effort. And ultimately, I don't know how to describe this. I thought about how to describe this, and I've yet to come up with a good way. But the nature of reality is that we're created. The intention of our creation is for us to be blissful. You could say we're kind of forced to be happy, although when you experience it, you don't mind being forced to be happy. If you're put in a situation where you're completely blissful, you're generally grateful. You're not resentful. Oh, you made me feel this way. But that's the reality that Krishna set up, that if we simply accept our constitutional position, I'm a servant, I'm not the supreme, I'm not totally free to do whatever I want. If I was free to do whatever I want, I could drive on the wrong side of the road, depending what country you're in, that might be the right, might be the left, with no repercussion. But the fact is, if you drive on the wrong side of the road, you're either going to get in an accident, or you're going to get a ticket, or you're going to get killed, something. So just on a basic level, we don't have total freedom. We're constrained. There's laws we have to follow. And if we don't follow them, either we'll get punished or we'll suffer. So we don't have absolute freedom. So when we accept that and say, okay, my position, my nature is to serve the Supreme, so let me do that, then we become very, very happy. And if we don't do that, we become miserable. So one could say, an atheist could say, well, God is forcing you to serve him. He's this egotistical person that just demands everyone to serve him. But the reality is that when we engage in service to the Supreme Lord, he becomes purchased to the point where it's almost like a transcendental competition. We serve the Lord not because we want anything, but because he gives us pleasure. In the beginning, we may serve him because I'm supposed to. Okay, I'm supposed to do this, I'll do it. And then as we do engage in service, we get a lot of happiness and we realize, oh, this is not so bad. I kind of want to do that. So we go from doing it because we're supposed to, well, I'm going to do it because it makes me happy. And then we go to, well, I'm going to do it because it makes Krishna happy. Even if it may be hard for me, he likes it, so I'll do it. And when we enter into that mood, then Krishna gets involved and says, well, that's nice. Thank you very much for your service. But he serves his devotee. He becomes a little bit of a transcendental love match, you could say, that the devotee is simply doing something for Krishna out of his selflessness, and Krishna says, well, let me do something for you. And so and we can see this in Srila Prabhupada's life, Arjuna's life, so many examples, that the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes subservient to his devotees. So it's a very loving relationship. And so this is the reality to which we're destined. This is our constitutional position, is to be in a very loving, blissful reality. And all we have to do to get there is do what we're meant to do. We just have to follow. And water is the dharma of water is wetness. Right? The dharma of sugar is sweetness. So we already contain all the ingredients. We just have to remember them, uncover them through reading and chanting and these different spiritual practices. We just have to become absorbed in who I am. And then when we do that, life becomes very wonderful and magical. We become very happy, and that's our nature. That's our destiny. That's our DNA, you could say, is to become blissful. Satchidananda. That's who we are as living entities, blissful, full of knowledge, eternal. It's already there. We just have forgotten it. So it's that forgetfulness that creates these horrendous situations. We forget who we are and we think we're someone else, and then we act on the wrong platform. So, kind of stop there. I've kind of veered off the main points I wanted to make, but I made them. So maybe we'll stop and see if there's any questions or comments anyone has. Yes, Nate.
Thank you. Everything you said was simple yet added a lot of understanding to some major points in the philosophy. I've never read like hellish descriptions before, but I think it adds a layer of understanding to the cycle of birth and death, and how and an impetus for compassion when we are in situations like we've all been in hellish conditions in this life and in previous lives. We've all probably been through this, and just adds a layer of reasoning to urgency to spread a higher consciousness. And I think about my mom. There's a description about vultures taking out your insides, and she's always said that's her biggest fear. And so I just like I thought about that too. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, when I was young, I used to have nightmares of snakes, being surrounded by snakes, and it just wake me up every night. Or just different things we fear. And it's a good point about compassion, because the tendency of the mind, and if we're not careful, we can fall in the trap of seeing someone suffering and thinking, well, they're suffering because it's their karma, and so they deserved it, they earned it, or whatever. So I shouldn't feel bad about it. And while on one level, yes, it's true. They're suffering because of their karma, and maybe they do deserve it. As spiritualists, our duty as a compassionate spiritual practitioner, as a devotee, is to relieve people's sufferings. And so we should try to stop that karmic cycle. Sometimes devotees are criticized because you just go out in the streets and you chant, and there's starving people in the world, why aren't you feeding them, and things like that. And of course we do, because of Gaines's, this temple's famous for distributing prasadam and feeding people. And so, but just giving someone a blanket, or just relieving their material suffering, is very temporary. And if you don't get to the seed, the heart, whatever action they did to incur that suffering, they may go do it again and incur more suffering. So you haven't really helped them. But when you give them some spiritual, foodstuffs, prasadam, you chant and give the holy name, you expose them to some knowledge, it may look like you're not relieving all of their material suffering, although feeding them, it's pretty hard to ignore that you're not. There was a really beautiful article written back in the early 90s by New York Times, when there was a disaster in, I think it was Chechnya. Somewhere there was a war, and devotees were there distributing prasadam, and bullets were flying overhead. And there are some I don't like to get controversial. There have been devotees that say, well, distributing prasadam is not a spiritual activity. It's just mundane. You're just feeding people. We should be giving a book and making them chant Hare Krishna. That's spiritual. But this article from the New York Times described these devotees who were feeding people in a war zone, and they weren't doing Harinam, they weren't distributing books, they were just feeding people, because there was a war going on and people couldn't get food. And the article described the situation and made the comparison and said, these devotees are like the modern day Mother Teresa. They saw this as a spiritual activity. They said, these are saints. What are they doing? They're feeding people. Well, feeding people isn't a spiritual activity. But they could understand the compassion. But so to your point, so when we see people suffering, we can do something, give them prasadam, give them a book, give them a smile, give them some kind words, just be nice to them and compassionate. And if we can stop that cycle, somebody gets angry and yells and screams and you just tolerate it. If you yell and scream back, you just continue the cycle and you just tolerate and accept it and don't take offense. Then the cycle stops. Now they can move on. And so it's an important point that yeah, these punishments are there. We have to be compassionate. We have to try to remove or reduce people's suffering. Just in the same way somebody did it to us, right? At some point we were suffering and somebody came and gave me this knowledge and helped me to not suffer. So I should do the same for others. A nice point, thank you. Yes.
A lot of times, like our understanding is with the cycle of birth and death and reincarnation that we can go through this, like it was described, go through the lower planetary systems and work your way up through all the animal kingdoms, and then you get to a human birth, and then you get blessed enough by doing pious activities or have some type of exposure to devotional service, then you can take on like some type of devotee birth or a birth where you're close to this type of knowledge. And even in India, they feel like because they were born very close to the opportunity to learn Vedic scriptures, like it's a blessing. And I agree with that. It's a blessing to be around high level personalities and high level scriptures. There's no doubt about it. It's a treasure. And so, but then that makes me wonder, and I've always wondered, what about when devotees are abused and hurt by other devotees after, you've made it to this point in your life?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That gets painful to experience and painful to see. One thing to understand is a statement Bhaktivinoda Thakur made that a devotee doesn't mean one who puts on a dhoti and tilak and they're devotee, which I thought for many years. Oh, I'll dress this way and put on tilak and I'm a devotee. I realized that, well, actually, there's a little bit more to it. You have to actually change your heart and act like a devotee and become compassionate and tolerant and all the control the senses. There's this whole other life besides just your external dress. So sometimes we see things happen between this person and this person, and we call them devotees because they look like devotees. But actually, one or both may not be acting like devotees. They're just acting out of their conditioning. And so they're just conditioned souls working out their own karma. That's not always the case, but sometimes it's the case that what we're seeing, there are people who have come into temples, lived as a devotee, and stole money and did different things and left, and they weren't really following the process and the program. But sometimes things do happen with devotees who are practicing, and they may mistreat it. What is hard to understand sometimes for me is that I tend to look at this one life of, I don't know whatever lifespan is, 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. Just say we all live to be 100. So here's your 100-year life. And you started here and you progressed, and at the end, you're going to hit the finish line and be perfect. But actually, that 100-year span is one frame of a very long movie. We're eternal living entities. If you go back that direction, we've existed forever. Who knows what we've done? Who knows what baggage we're bringing with us, karmically or otherwise? You go this way, it goes on forever. And so sometimes it takes time. Srila Prabhupada described it for Westerners. Like you said, in India, born in India, generally speaking, people, the Krishna consciousness, you rub the skin, it's right there. They're saturated. And I saw it when I went to India, just You've got the cab driver has got an altar on his thing, and like everybody, it's not a question of if God is real or not. In India, you just debate who is God. There's no question. Obviously, there's a God. Everybody knows that. But who is God? You can debate it. In America, it's like the debate is whether or not there is a God. So Prabhupada described Westerners engaged in spiritual life. It's like cleaning coal, right? You clean the coal, then what do you get? You get more coal. And you clean that, and you get more coal. It's just like saturated with coal. And so for us, because the conditioning in America or the Western world is so materialistic, there's layers and layers of materialism that have to come off. And so we look at this one frame of 100 years and we say, well, look, this person's been a devotee all this time and they're still acting like this. It's like, well, yeah, but all this baggage they're bringing with them. And so it may, in some cases, take some time for these things to take effect. There's a beautiful statement in the Harinam Chintamani about the holy name. It says, when we chant the holy name, there's statements in the scriptures about you just chant once and you're liberated, and you chant Hare Krishna and your life is perfect. There's all these statements. And yet here we are chanting for many days or many years, and we're not feeling these wonderful things. And it's described in Harinam Chintamani that the result is there. It's just due to inattentiveness or impurity of heart, the result might be delayed a little bit. It might take some time for it to fully manifest because we have to undo some of this baggage and this process. And so sometimes we see these things, and I don't think there's one answer to your question, but it could just be, okay, they're both, these individuals are still advancing and they're still working stuff out. It can also be Krishna may be involved in creating, not that Krishna is making this happen, but we all have desires and attachments and friction. Is described once how, they don't have it now, but when I was young, they used to have these toys for kids called tumblers. So you buy this can, you get these rocks that just look like ugly gray sharp rocks. You put them in this can, you turn on a little motor, and it just turns for days and weeks, just turns. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, you take it out, and all these stones are beautiful, ruby. I don't know if they're actual rubies, but they're real beautiful. They're smooth, and they're polished, and they're green and red, and they look gorgeous. But the process of making them that way, it's the same for sanding. I do woodworking. And in woodworking, before you apply your finish, you want the surface very smooth. If it's not smooth, it doesn't look very good. Well, the process of making something smooth, whether it's a rock or whether it's a piece of wood, it's very violent. Right? You take sandpaper, and if you look at sandpaper very close, it's got this really sharp edge. You really rub it against your skin, you'll bleed. And you're taking that against the wood, it's very violent, and you're knocking off all these rough edges, and you get all this dust. And you do that enough, and then it's real smooth. So the process of purification is sometimes painful. We have to knock off all these rough edges. And so sometimes, especially when you're in a room or a community of individuals and they're all trying to make advancement, we all have these little anarthas or idiosyncrasies or imperfections, these frictions come about, and it doesn't feel very good. But when it's over, we look back, we say, oh, wow, we can see how those things helped us. When I look back in my life and I see those times when I really made a lot of advancement, many of them were not very pleasant. But now I look back and I'm so grateful I went through that because, wow, I'm going to touch this, I'm going to touch that. But when it was happening, I didn't like it. It's like, this is painful. And so sometimes that's going on in these different situations. So I think what you described, there could be a lot of different reasons for it. Sometimes it's just wrong, somebody's misbehaving and they're just not doing the right thing. Sometimes it's just a natural course of, purification coming out. Could be different causes, but it's complex. And that's one of the reasons there's a lot of injunctions for us to just be patient, be tolerant. Like we should just don't take offense. And, what Lord Chaitanya said, when you chant the holy name, don't expect any respect. Give all respect to others and don't expect any. If someone gives us respect, You know, if you study Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teachings and someone gives us respect, we should feel uncomfortable because it's like, this is not good. If they keep giving respect, I'm going to start to become proud and think that I deserve it. And it's just like they're giving me a burden. So we should think like that. I don't think like that. People give me respect, and I'm like, I'm so happy. Oh yes, this is nice. They recognize that I'm a good person. That's the wrong way to think because it just feeds our false ego, and then later we have to try to undo that. So when we're in that frame of mind, people do things and we just tolerate it. It doesn't bother us, and then it's easier. But it's hard to see. It's hard to see it when it happens to someone else. For us, fine, we can tolerate it. But then when we see someone else mistreated, that's hard to tolerate, and sometimes maybe we need to intervene. But it is a hard thing to understand and to see. I hope some of that helps.
I know that was a hard question and it's a hard thing to understand, but that was really a bunch of great ideas and answers. I really appreciate it. I think about Prahlad Maharaj when he got to pray to the Lord in the Srimad. He took radical acceptance for all the suffering that he endured throughout that pastime, and he said, you know, this is just, I must have done things many, many lifetimes ago. And so I think about that too in my adult years. You know, I don't think that's a really, you know, great thing to maybe tell a child, like, this is happening to you because you deserve it, you know. But as an adult, you know, in retrospect, looking back at some of the hard things that happened growing up, I think I'm like, you know, if I really look back and have that perspective that I've been around for who knows how long, not just 36 years, but millions, who knows what's coming up in my lifetime now. And, yeah, thank you so much.
Sometimes devotees will ask, I know I've asked that why can we not remember? Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, both you and I were present, you know, millions of years ago. I remember, you can't. We're like, well, how come we can't remember? And I don't know the answer, but I'm pretty sure I don't want to know the past because if I knew, I'd go insane. I'm like, what? I did what? Better that I forget and just, you know, move on. But yeah. So I'm looking at the clock that just keeps moving in one direction only and feeling like maybe I should stop. Last question or point? Yes.
Thanks, Prabhu. Just kind of going off of that question a bit. I understand like offering respect to everyone is so important, but sometimes we're not there yet, like to just not take everything personally and stuff. So my question is, how do we also set like so if you can speak a little bit about like boundaries and like how do we set like some boundaries with some people so we can keep growing spiritually?
Boundaries for how they treat us or how we treat them, or what kind of boundaries?
Just like the treatment we like receive from others. Like how do we set some boundaries?
Well, two things come to mind, and I hope this answers your question. Let me know if it doesn't. One is, while we understand theoretically or philosophically we should give all respect to others, there are people, I can think of individuals that's really hard to do because that person is just, it's hard for me to give them respect. But when I realize God's living in their heart and He loves them, I'm like, oh, okay. Then I can at least respect the fact that they're a living entity and God's in their heart also, just like He's in mine. Even if their false ego makes it hard for me to give them respect, I can respect that divinity within. That's what namaste actually means. So, you know, respect the divinity within you, something to that effect. So then it can help a little bit to see past their false ego. Because usually when we deal with people, we're just seeing their false ego in their mind, and it's not even them. So that I find it can be helpful in terms of giving others respect. In terms of boundaries with me, we can while it's true that we should not take offense and tolerate things, I think it's Srila Prabhupada, he mentions that, yes, we're respectful to everyone and we don't take offense, but we don't embrace the tiger because the nature of the tiger is to eat things that have blood in them. And it may not be healthy for us we may have compassion and love them, but from a distance. So there are some people that when we're with them, it doesn't help develop our love for God. It doesn't help us to become peaceful. So we can respect them and we can tolerate them from a distance and not find fault and get in there, but just say, well, it may not be in my best interest to associate with this person too closely. And sometimes that can help because we need to keep our space, and whatever our space is, I don't know, but we need to keep our space sacred so that we can think all these thoughts. And if we're disturbed, all these materialistic things, it becomes very difficult. So we need some protection. We need to protect them. And that we get from associating with good people. That gives us some protection. We read the right things, we do the right activities. And sometimes we have to just say, well, it's fine, I'll tolerate things, but I'm not going to put myself in a situation that's going to make it harder for me to tolerate how I'm being treated, because I know this person's going to mistreat me, and I'm not so good at tolerating things. So maybe I'll just avoid that person. I don't know if that's the kind of boundary I tend to think in. Maybe someday I can be with them and it won't affect me, but today I'm not that strong, so I don't want to find fault with them and get upset. So I'll just maybe go this way and not go that way, because if I go over there, then it's not going to go well. So, we want to associate, and we have to discriminate, and it's a hard thing to say, but, you put on Dodi and Tilak or Sari and Tilak, that doesn't make you a devotee. Devotee means how you act, how you think, and your behavior. There are different levels of devotees. We want to associate with people more advanced than us that have better qualities than us so we can develop. And if some devotees are still working on their qualities, well, that may not help us. Maybe this person will help me more. I mean, it's tricky, and we won't want to discriminate. We love everyone, we accept everyone, but we want to get rid of our narcissists. We need to find those people that can help us to be better and not just be comfortable and stay where we're at. So we need to be selective and when we can. Sometimes we don't have a choice, and that's fine, but I don't know if that helps. I hope so. All right, now I'm pretty sure I'm past my time, so I'm going to stop there. Granthara Shim Bhagavatam Ki Jai.